This is our community's house. We are all guests in it here to serve our community. My name is Mike Little, Mayor of the District of North Vancouver, and so the pleasure falls to me to welcome you all here to our regular meeting of Council for Monday, April 8th at 7 o'clock. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the agenda? So moved. Thank you. Prepared to call a question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. To start our meeting off in a good way, Councillor Pope, are you willing to read our land acknowledgement?
Thank you. We respectfully acknowledge the original peoples of these lands and waters, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam, on whose unceded ancestral lands the District of North Vancouver is located. We value the opportunity to learn, share, and serve our community on these unceded lands.
Thank you, Councillor. We operate this meeting in a hybrid fashion, which means members of the public, members of staff, and council are permitted to participate virtually or in person. And to that end, Councillor Back is joining us virtually this evening, so you do have the full council here this evening. Always welcome special guests, the chair of the school board here, Linda Monroe, welcome. At this point, Council, we have a couple of sets of meeting minutes that have been circulated with the package. So these are the meeting minutes from the January 8th regular council meeting and the February 26th regular council meeting. Are there any errors or omissions from those minutes as presented? Hearing none, will someone please move adoption of the meeting minutes? Moved by Councillor Murray. Is there a seconder on the matter? Second by Councillor Ma. Prepared to call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council. At the front end of every regular meeting of council, we reserve a period of time up to 30 minutes to hear representations from the public through public input. Members of the public can speak for up to 3 minutes at the beginning. We have no speakers signed up to speak in public input at this time. And so I will go to the room and the virtual participants. If anybody would like to speak, I do see Hazen Colbert and Corey Cost. If we could move them over as panelists, that'd be great. Okay.
Not yet, huh?
Oh, now I can hear you. There you go.
Oh, you could hear me. I was okay.
Yep. I suspect Lydia's assisting. There you go. Thank you very much, Dr. Koss. I can hear you. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the council.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Corey Cost. I live near Adjournment Village for, well, I guess the last 50 years. So I just want to make a comment. As you know, I'm quite a participant over that period of time, last 30 years anyway, of public input and engagement with councils about issues that I think are relative to the community. And as you know, the province has made it more difficult to have public hearings. And it's in that vein that I welcome the introduction of a discussion of how to have alternative ways to have that discussion put in by Catherine Pope on item 8.6. So I wholeheartedly endorse that, and I hope council will as well. That discussion into the future. I did send a couple of items to council in the meantime while I was waiting at the other meeting. And I hope you will have the patience to read some of the material there. I think it's good stuff, although it's hard to take sometimes. That some studies have indicated that public hearings don't often persuade council to change their minds. That was kind of a downer, I should say. But perhaps, as I also said, smaller municipalities like ours are not quite as bureaucratic and rigid as the larger municipalities are in British Columbia. So I thank you for my input and good evening.
Thank you very much for your comments, Corey Cox. Would anybody else like to address today's meeting in person or virtually today? Okay, I see no further speakers, so we're going to carry on with this evening's agenda. We'll be starting this evening's meeting with delegation as well, and we have representatives from the Canadian Mental Health Association North and West Vancouver here. And are they here or are they joining us virtually? Anyone here from the CMHA? No? Okay. Okay, great. So we're just moving them over as panelists on the meeting. It'll just take a moment to connect them up with the meeting.
Hello.
Speakers. Hello.
Hi. Hello, Mayor and Council members. My name is Talia Jamshidi. I'm the Director of Operations with Canadian Mental Health Association, and I'm here with my colleague, Tedrob Barde, PACT
Okay.
Manager.
Just before we get going here, so just for the public's benefit, going to describe a delegation is a slightly different opportunity. It's when organizations within the community can come forward and speak a little bit more in depth about a particular issue. And so with regular input, we allow 3 minutes for people to speak. With delegations, they're permitted 5, and a question and answer opportunity for members of council following the delegation. And so at this point, we're going to go to the members of the Canadian Mental Health Association for their discussion. Welcome, you have 5 minutes to address the council.
Thank you. Thank you. We do have a PowerPoint presentation. I'm wondering if I'm permitted to share that.
You should be able to, it's clear, so you should be able to within your system.
Great, thank you. All right, so just gonna start with a picture of our team here at Canadian
Just want to
Mental
be clear,
Health.
I can't see the slideshow yet. Is it still coming up?
Let's see. Just gonna retry again.
Oh, that looks weird screen. There you go. If you can make that full screen, that would be great.
Sure. One moment.
Should be the button almost at the bottom right, just to the left of the slider, down in the bottom right corner.
Sorry about that.
Where it says slideshow,
There
there you go. You should be able to start from the beginning once you click on slideshow.
Are you able to see it in full screen?
Well, you can leave it in this mode and go slide by slide as well. That should be fine.
Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. I will be able to fix this. Just gonna stop share and reshare it again.
There we go.
All right, sorry about that. It's not working, sorry about that. I'm just gonna start because I don't want to take your time any longer than this. So as you guys know, we are from Canadian Mental Health Association. As I mentioned, I'm here with my colleague, Tejal the PACT manager. So I'm just going to go to this slide right here. So usually the individual in crisis contacts us that are often experiencing distress or feeling alone. They get redirected to our internal programs and services based on their needs.
So I'm going to encourage you to just, if you can slow down, we can adjust the time a little bit, just make sure you're speaking directly into the microphone. That would, unfortunately, it's not super clear on our end, but
Sure.
take your time, go for it.
Thank you. So usually individual who is in crisis, they contact us and they often experiencing distress or feeling alone. They get redirected to our internal programs and services like counseling, employment, housing, different social support groups, and some individuals feel a sense of purpose and belonging in the community. Often the individual come back either to re-engage with some of our services or they come back and they want to engage as a volunteering capacity with CMHA. So what is North Shore Peer Assisted Care Team? North Shore PACT is a mobile community-led crisis response team that was launched on November 4th, 2021. PACT attends to crisis call related to mental health or substance use on North Shore. Anyone ages 13 years old up, they can reach us through a phone call or a text message. We do an intake, and when we see fit, we do deploy a team of mental health professional with a peer support worker to meet in person with the individual or families that are in crisis. We are available 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 12:30 midnight. We provide services in English and Farsi. And we are grateful for the Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction for funding PACT. PACT is currently operating in New Westminster, Victoria, and on the North Shore. There are other PACT groups are coming soon in Kamloops, Prince George, Comox, and Courtney. And there will also be 3 more announcements of PACT in different communities really soon. Over the past 6 months, our contacts has increased significantly. The contacts are either by phone call or a text. A lot of them are from a city or district of North Vancouver. We have received over 2,309 contacts, and we were involving police for 27 of those times. Paramedics were involved for 9 times, and also PACT received a total of 416 contacts from district of North Van. So we get most of our calls from individuals calling for themselves. However, there are a good portion of our calls coming from third parties who could be family, friends, or neighbors of the individuals in crisis. And they would call for that person in crisis. And our services are voluntarily and consent based. So the type of the calls that we have been responded to or we have been receiving have been individuals with suicidal ideation or substance use or additional diagnosed mental health as well, such as depression or panic attacks. PACT intention is to respond to mental health crisis or substance use, but we are also receiving calls about intimate violence, immigration problems, and food insecurity. We are engaging with different stakeholders on the North Shore, Municipal Emergency Response Team, First Nations, BCH representatives, school districts, and community organizations that we have initially built a strong relationship with. Since we launched PACT, here are the key findings. We have noticed that we have made the service enhancement and accessible to individuals and communities for early interventions. We acknowledge that we have provided a different response to mental health challenges. We are continuing to collaborate with emergency services, and there's a role for everyone to play in the community. Since the North Shore PACT launched, we provided provided support to Farsi-speaking community as well. PACT services are for anyone in the community. We have provided services to people who are unhoused, And also it's a range of services and also people who are middle class families. Mental health crisis can affect us no matter what background we all have. I also want to share one story with you. We have served a client who was an immigrant. They contacted Pat when they were staying in their car. They recently had been laid off from their job. They were unhoused and were dealing with mental health illnesses that had taken over their life. They were diagnosed with major depressive disorder and were experiencing anxious thoughts, and they had suicidal thoughts. Since they couldn't navigate the system and there was a lot of barriers for them to access some of the services, through PAC, they were referred to CMHA internal programs. After being assessed, they were found that they are a really good fit for our cycle of care housing program to provide them with some stability to start thinking of their short and long-term goals. They are currently housed in one of our cycle of care homes. I also want to bring to your attention that in the past few months, we have been facing over the past few months, we have been dealing with a significant issue with one of our cycle of home for females and couples who are resident there. We got an eviction notice as a property being renovated by new owners, and we need to find a new homes for those residents by end of the May. It's been really tough due to low rentals and also high prices in the market. We wanted to take this advantage to also ask you guys if you could help us find a suitable rental property or a landlord that you may know through your network that want to rent to us. If you could just please share this message, and that would be highly appreciated.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. So I'll look to council. Receipt has been moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Hanson. Councillor Murray, did you have additional comments?
I would just like to thank you for the presentation. Is there a written, it was just, the sound wasn't very good, so it was really hard to hear you. If you have any information that you can forward us other than the PowerPoint presentation, just maybe to have a little bit more clarity on what was said. It's unfortunate that the sound wasn't very clear. It was hard to understand. But thank you for your work. It's troubling that the calls are increasing. Yeah, it seems to be increasing everywhere. And a very challenging time right now in our community and the Lower Mainland and the province in this country. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got Councillors Hanson, Ma, wishing to speak. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for all the good work that you're doing in the community on this important issue and the issue of our times in many respects, mental health intervention and mental health support within our community. So we saw this calls to North Shore Pact, and we see the trend line, which is really straight up from September to January, a little bit of a relief in February, but as you say, a dramatic increase in calls. I perhaps ask you if you could have any comment on the underlying cause of that. What are the conditions that are giving rise to these increase in calls? Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So we do get a lot of calls that are, I'm not sure if you guys can hear me or not, but most of the calls are people feeling really isolated, and they have to deal with a lot of anxiety, and there are panic attacks. There are some calls that people are unhoused, and they are also feeling pretty anxious and unsure of the future. That's how we are getting some of the calls. We also get some calls from our Farsi-speaking community in North Shore. Most of those related to, again, isolation, intimate violence, and some food insecurities.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ma?
I also want to thank you, and I'm very thankful that there are services like yours to serve our community. I did look at some of the stats. One that kind of popped out at me was of your roughly 2,300 calls, there's only about 1% that involved the police. I have two questions. Can you help me to describe the relationship or interaction with the police on some of these calls?
Yes, definitely. So the reason that there was only 27 intervention with police, it means that we were able to resolve or de-escalate the situation, and we didn't need to involve the police support in those calls.
Okay, great. I know you mentioned something at the tail end of your presentation about looking for a facility, and we didn't quite get that, but can you just explain what you were looking for?
Definitely. One of our programs is called Circle of Care Home. So Circle of Care, we do work in partnership with Health Connections and some faith communities on the North Shore, and we house people who are precariously housed. So one of the houses that is for females and also couples, we are getting evicted because of the new owners, and they want to do some renovation to their properties, and we still were not able to find a replacement. So that means if we are unable to secure a house, our residents will be homeless really soon.
Okay. This may be one final question. It sounds great that your organization is responding. I'm wondering what we can do to maybe try to prevent these calls from happening. Like, what is it as a community that we should maybe be doing, and maybe in partnership with our schools or something? So
this is all great ideas. Yes, we are in touch with our schools, different schools counselors, wanting to do early interventions with PACT, and we have done a great outreach through North Shore, like North Vancouver and West Vancouver schools, and also the school district.
okay, great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you have additional comments, Tejal?
Yes, just to hold Councillor Mar there for a second, I also just want to bring up that on the North Shore, it has been really challenging to talk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So it has been challenging to talk about mental illness, substance use, and really to open up those conversations, especially because there is such a disparity in the income levels and the community itself on the North Shore, and also between the different the community members and the different ethnic backgrounds and the level of immigration that has gone up. So really, I mean, when we go out into community as a team, but also when our engagement coordinator goes out into community, we really, try and talk about mental illness as as somebody's talking about exercise, really to open up those conversations so that people can reach out for support when they need it, because everybody is going through something. And I think it is really important for them to know that it is common and that they're not alone in this and in their journey, and that it's okay to always seek for support, and then basically go from there so they can find what the right resources in the community is, because sometimes people are also not aware of how much a community has, because they haven't reached out, and because there's so much stigma that is around mental illness and substance use and the and other social barriers that come with it.
Thank you. Councillor Back, comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Little. Just firstly, hopefully you can all hear me okay.
I can hear you clearly. Nice and loud voice, though.
Great. Well, Thank you very much for your presentation this evening, and I, along with my colleagues, want to express my appreciation for the work that you were doing, CMHA, here on the North Shore with your PACT program. Just a couple of questions. One, I wonder if you could explain a little bit how you work with other social service agencies on the North Shore. You talked about one of the issues that you hear from being food insecurity, for instance, and I wonder if you could talk about that and how you're referring those people who do call with those types of issues to other organizations that may be able to help on the North Shore.
Sure, great, yes. So we do make referrals to different communities in the North Shore, especially when it comes to food insecurity. CMHA partners up with Food Bank Greater Vancouver. We do have a food pantry program, but also there are other food programs happening on the North Shore, like Salvation Army, North Shore Neighborhood House, and other ones that are happening. So we do send referrals and pair them up with different organizations as based on what their needs are.
That's great. Again, want to just express my appreciation for the way you're breaking down the stigma around mental health. I think it is extremely concerning to see the number of contacts going up, and I guess I'll leave it with my final question, which would be, what more could we be doing at the district to support your work?
If you could raise awareness for PACT, and if you could pass it to your network, and if people let them know that we are here to support and serve our North Shore community.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with one instance that a local resident had with PAC where it was a teen talking about a bullying situation at school, and they made the phone call, and the decision was made to meet with them in person. And so I was really glad to hear that there was that kind of flexibility, that some things you can address over the phone and some things you sort of have to make that in-person connection with someone in order to be able to get through it. And I thought that was great to add that service to our community. We were very glad that the District of North Vancouver could be one of the initial piloting partners with PACT versus so many other municipalities that are facing a lot of the same challenges as us. I'm glad that we could partner and be a starting community for this service. Council, you've moved receipt of the delegation. At this point, I'd like to call a question. All in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. So on behalf of the council, thank you very much for your presentation here today. We look forward to working with you for a long time into the future.
Thank you.
Okay, council, as we return to the reports, to the regular agenda, and we move, there is a release of closed meeting decisions from the January 8th closed special meeting of council that is put into the package, the council package there. As we move on to the regular items, section 8 reports from council or staff, I would like to propose a consent agenda. This would be for items 8.1, 8.2, and 8.4. The first item, 8.1, is up for adoption and would not be up for debate. Number 2 is for issuance of the permit for the manufacturer's license lounge and endorsing Bridge Brewing. And 8.4 is the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. Would any member of council like to withdraw one? So I've heard that 8.1 like to be withdrawn. Would 8.2 or 8.4, any member of council like to withdraw them? Okay, and so we'll put forward that consent. I'll call the question on the consent agenda of 8. Oh, we need a seconder for 8.4. Seconded. Thank you very much.
Second.
Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. So if you were here for item 8.2 or 8.4, they have just passed. All right, item 8.1 then was pulled from the consent agenda. As I said, this item is returning from second and third reading. It is up for adoption. There's no more debate on the item. So I'm prepared to call the question on the matter. Sorry, is there a mover and seconder on the matter? Moved by Councillor Ma, all second. I'll call the question on the motion. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries with Councillor Murray opposed. That might have been a delay. Councillor Back, were you in favor or opposed? An audible will help us.
In favor.
Thank you very much. There might be a bit of a video delay that we're experiencing here. Okay, thank you very much. So it's noted for the clerk that with Councillor Murray opposed, and the item passes. Moving on to item 8.3, this is Provincial Electric Kick Scooter Pilot Project Extension. And we do have some comments from staff on the item. We do, we don't.
They're looking at me, Your Worship.
I'm looking the wrong direction here. All right, there we go. Over to engineering, Mr. Joyce.
This is a continuation of the MOTA's framework and extension of the involvement district staff have been involved with the 13 other jurisdictions. And so what the report does is not a substantial change to our involvement. There's a few revisions, but it adds 4 more years from April 2024 to April 2028. And so it'll allow us and our 13 other partners, jurisdictions, and MOTI to assess the safety of the devices and help provide a permanent regulatory framework that fits in with the Motor Vehicle Amendment Act. So I'll mention again, there's no change from the district's involvement with the new pilot launch. That gives us 4 more years with our partners to look at this before it comes back, at which council can have a full discussion about how it fits in within our policies.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be moving the recommendation. Councillor Murray, I see you're in there. Will you be seconding?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Just my comments on the matter. You know, when this first came up for us, I remember commenting at the time that I was concerned about the health and safety aspect because I had heard that Kelowna, when they did their inclusion of the e-mobility and scooter program, that Kelowna General Hospital had said they were seeing more and more serious accidents in their downtown core from people having minor injuries, but they were representative of almost motorcycle level injuries that they were seeing on the different e-mobility scooters and bikes in the process. And so Kelowna General recommended back that they put a limiter, governor, regulator on the speeds of them to try to get that down to a more reasonable level. You know, so I think part of the pilot process is to really monitor that and see whether or not we are seeing those kinds of increases. And if it means an extension of the program to do more investigation into it and get better data, then I'm supportive of it. Councillor Murray, your comments as seconder?
Very much for those comments, Mayor Little, and I concur. I would just like to add that we do have to have a discussion about all the different forms of mobility on the you know, bike lanes, sidewalks, multi-use paths. We're talking about the Spirit Trail right now. You know, the Spirit Trail's original concept was about a multi-use pathway for people from, you know, the ages of 8 months or 8 days to 80 and beyond. And that's not really what's happening. I think if we're adding more uses to these multi-use paths, we've got to have some regulations on how people, you know, etiquette of those paths. I know Metro Vancouver Parks, you know, years ago when I first sat on the Parks Committee, multi-use was very typical in a municipality. More and more as the years and decades progress, we are looking at segregating those uses because there's so much point of impact with so many more people using these pathways, so many different vehicles using the pathways, speed regulations, for instance, you know, there's been talks about licensing, all of those kinds of things, insurance when there is a situation like the ones you've referred to. So this is a very big issue that's going to apply everywhere. And when would that be coming back, Mr. Joyce, to talk about the comments that I've made? What are we looking at?
Your Worship, I would suggest council meets to discuss the active transportation projects within the capital budget twice a year. So I'll talk to Mr. Cohen about adding that to the agenda as one of the topics, general mobility around active transportation.
We really do, and we really need to look at prioritization of those projects as well, where we need to find those connections that bring people quickly connected in the urban core versus, you know, how the prioritization. I know, Mayor Little, you've talked about that over the last few years about how we're prioritizing these projects. So I think we need to do that sooner than later, Mr. Joyce. Maybe when you come back after your retirement, we can talk about it.
Thank you very much. Okay, next speaker is Councillor Mah.
Thank you. I do support alternate modes of transportation, especially ones that have a low environmental impact. So I'm not sure if I have some questions, we ask them now or just pass them on to staff to, we can
If
ask.
they would help you make the decision that we're considering tonight, go
Well,
ahead.
There's just a couple of things in the report I'm trying to understand. There's a change of speed limit from 24 to 25 kilometers an hour. That seems relatively insignificant. Is there a reason for that? Is it for some consistency with other municipalities?
Yeah, I would
Joyce?
agree through your worship. That is rather, it's what Councillor Mah is referring to is maximum speed is now 25 kilometers an hour instead of 24. So it would be consistency, but I can get a quick answer from you from my team, I'm sure, on that before the end of the evening.
Yeah, this, when you read a report, something sticks out, then yeah. I noticed the new regulations also include a duty to perform a hook turn. Now, we were talking about this earlier, I learned how to do one of these when I was in Australia a couple of years ago, but how does one do that on a scooter? And if that's a requirement, is there going to be any kind of education or information to tell people how to do a hook turn?
Through your worship, that's part of it, is the hook turn has been identified, and yes, there's an educational component to this in a program.
Okay. And then in the analysis section of the report, and this is a point that Mayor Little brought up about I quote the report, injuries and conflicts with other road users are rare when operators follow the rules. Do we have any stats on injuries when the operators aren't following the rules? Like, do we have any stats on that?
Through your worship, I think adding the 4 years will give us a much better idea here. It's not a significant number of time yet to get the stats, but
Okay.
What you've identified are the two real key issues: is the speed of the scooters and the potential for accidents. So when we continuation with the pilot, and remember, there's 13 other jurisdictions, that's enough body of personnel that's involved that we should get some decent stats at the end of the 4 years.
Yeah, and just to echo Councilor Murray's point about, making sure that with all these different modes of transportation, that we really look at how we avoid conflicts and, how they all work together. But generally, I'm happy to support this resolution.
Yeah, I'll just to add through that, your worship. I mean, the direction for your transportation team is through the OCP and the reduction and try to move the modal split to the 35% trips, either walking, cycling, or other modes. And that's what they're launching off to make that happen.
Where are we at?
If you asked me right now, we are at about 12% transit, about 2 to 3% cycle, and the balance of the vast majority, about 84%, is vehicular trips, motor vehicle.
Thank you. Councilor Murray, was that from last time
Cars.
you're on the list?
Thought. It was from the last time, but maybe I have another
Councilor
thought.
Forbes is the first time speaker.
Go
Do you have
ahead,
comments?
Councilor Forbes.
Thank you, Worship. I'm in favor, generally speaking, of this, but a couple of things stood out to me. The 7.5 meters stopping device, a little over 21 feet, quite a distance, because my second concern is that we are getting more and more crowded. We seem to be adding more and more active transportation in the cycling lanes. And so I'm concerned about the amount of traffic that is now having to travel in the same lane. And this stopping requirement seems pretty high. So I'm just concerned about the safety of that. So when we get together, council and staff, I'd really like to address that sort of side of it, the safety and the amount of traffic that we are now upping on these cycling lanes. But I am in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Murray, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll wait till we have the discussion when Mr. Joyce comes back after retirement.
Okay. I see no further
to
speakers
public.
on the matter. I'm prepared to call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Okay, next item up for discussion is item 8.5. This is road marking visibility. This is a council generated report from Councillor Murray. I did meet with staff this morning to discuss it. And one thing I just wanted to point out is that in the second clause, it says staff provide this information to council prior to annual maintenance work commencing. Annual maintenance work has already commenced for this year. And so there are some things they can do to get some information going and maybe trial a few different options this year, but the annual maintenance for this period has already started and is already contracted and tendered. And so I don't know, Mr. Joyce, if you have any additional comments on that aspect before the council discussion?
Your worship, I would just say we absolutely support the motion. We really do. It's something I've noticed through the Lower Mainland. Not just our community, and certainly as you travel the world and cities around Europe, we could do a better job. I really do believe we can. Just quickly, we typically use two products, or have done in the past. One's called thermoplastic, which is for arterial roads, just plastic type, and then we use paint and more environmentally friendly paint, waterborne paint in the last few years. That doesn't last very long, a year or two at the most, and thermoplastic lasts considerably longer. We've got some stretches with 4 or 5 years now. We are looking to experiment with other products. Wet Night is one, a product by 3M on East Keith Road. East Keith Road. Your worship, in our conversation this morning, I went back and had a look. Yes, it's incredibly expensive. So that's the trick here. But we will come back with some detailed research. I would also maybe add that would it be helpful if council added something to this motion in regards to dealing with the Ministry of Transportation and Highways. In my own experience, I see a lot of lane markings around this community, and Pam was alluding to the fact we've had contact, but not a lot of support in their infrastructure and their line markings for several years now. And you were mentioning about 80% of the complaints we do get around infrastructure that's looked after by the ministry. So that'd be helpful if council was to endorse that. We write a letter and try to bring MOTI on side on moving in this direction as well. But without getting too much into it, certainly there's some supply chain issues with COVID, and most municipalities are behind in their program. There's not a lot of product and suppliers in this region now. There's only 2. And so it's taken a while on some of our streets, but overall very much support the motion in bringing back to council some of the initiatives we're looking at and putting more time and resources into this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Councillor Murray, it's your report.
Move it.
Move it. Is there a seconder for the report? Thank you. I see Councillor Forbes. Councillor Murray, your comments?
I'm looking at multiple suppliers. I looked at that today actually, and so when you said there's only 2 in the region, I was surprised by that because I'm looking and there's pages of them in British Columbia, but maybe we only deal with certain ones. So this is something that's been happening for a while because the federal government actually prohibited the oil-based paint that was used in the past for environmental reasons. And so they went to a water-based paint, and here lies the problem. I know we've all experienced this, and I think the one that was the most telling was right after we finished the Mountain Highway interchange. I phoned Mr. Joyce and I said, all the lines on the road have disappeared. And he went down the route on his way home after a council meeting, and lo and behold, all the lines had disappeared. It's like in some cases, it's chipping off, I think, where the thermoplastic is. And then in other cases, it's just fading. The yellow MOTI lines, Ministry of Transportation lines, seem to be holding up better than the white paint. The white paint is just absolutely disappearing. But apart from that, for years, I would say for decades, it's not just the paint. And here's where the discussion of cat's eyes come back. And I know every year We take part in a little local cleanup down on Mount Seymour Parkway, and we've picked up dozens. I picked up dozens this year myself of cat's eyes that were chipped off by the plows. And so I get that that is a problem. In Washington State, they actually depress them into the pavement. But on those areas on Mount Seymour Road, Dollarton, Lower Keith, anywhere that it's flat or on a hill where it's like the cut, for instance, the lines can disappear because of the reflection of the lights. So you've got an uneven paved surface, you've got pooling water and very hard rain, and it makes the pavement shiny. And because it's uneven, the lines disappear. Even if they're there, they disappear at night. I mean, it is absolutely frightening on Dollarton. And, you know, I'm a pretty savvy driver, I think. I'm an aggressive driver, but you have to be driving in this town now. You have to be, I'm assertive. Well,
This isn't a confessional now.
well,
Counselor Murray.
I'm not confessing. I'm saying that it's hard to drive out there in this place that we live in. And I fear for people that are nervous in a car in the evening. It's frightening to be able to drive. And if you're not very clear on where you should be on the road and you're relying on those lines, they're just not there to help protect you. So the reason I asked for this to come back, Councillor Pete Fry from the City of Vancouver brought forward a motion last year to include lines in the overall maintenance of the roadways. I understand Modi does a 5-year contract on their maintenance with lining. So that's why I brought it back. Now, we haven't been doing any maintenance on our lines because it's not line painting season because it's pouring rain out and it's too cold. So we do that generally in the summertime or when the weather gets nice and when it's drier. So that's why I asked for it to come back, because when this motion was, it was, you know, built in March, we're now middle of April, or nearly we're middle of April. So I can't imagine us we're not putting lines on the road right now because it's wet. So I want to make sure that we do experiment with that high visibility reflective paint in very key areas, very problematic areas, those ones that I've spoken about, and I think other councillors in the community will completely back me up. I'll take my other 2 minutes. This has been a very wholesome discussion on Facebook, this motion, because of the original story I saw in Australia. I think cost, you know, I'm sorry, some things cost money. And, you know, I think that we have to have safety on our roads. And if it's going to cost a little bit more money, I see swaths of green paint along Lower Lynn at Keith Road that appeared, and it was very costly to put that green thermoplastic paint in for the bus lane. And then lo and behold, 2 years later, it was all removed. So, you know, obviously we are willing to put money into using it. I think it should be used to separate the lanes and provide, you know, an ability for people to actually see where they're driving. So I do think that we should experiment with it. I do want also staff to report back on the depression of cat's eyes that Washington State uses. I think that is a solution. We had a problem with manhole covers, particularly on the Mount Seymour Parkway, where the manhole covers were engineered right on your left tire. We raised the manhole covers to solve that problem. So in this case, I'm sure we could depress the cat's eyes in specific areas that were problematic. And certainly I would be in favor of adding an ability for staff to be able to write a letter to the Ministry of Transportation, because many of these areas are their responsibility. Mountain Highway Interchange to be one, and it's horrific. They just don't exist. I noticed the other day going up to Lynn Valley that the Rainbow Crosswalk is disappearing. That was just put in not too long ago, and that's also disappearing, and that would be with thermogenic paint as well. So these products from my perspective are substandard, and we need to do a little more research on getting some better products. And obviously, the move from the federal government has created this issue across the country. And we need to address it because it is an issue of safety.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Forbes and Hanson. Councillor Forbes, your comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm totally in support of this, and I have raised a particular spot in the road that I travel quite often, and that's the hill of 29th. And that road, when you're coming west to east, it's a straight lane up, and just as you get over the crest where the light standard is situated, you get blinded and you're coming over the crest, and then the road does this little bit of a zigzag. And so unless you know that road, and even when you know it, if it's pouring down really hard rain like we had today, and it's nighttime and that light blinds you, it's very difficult to follow the road. And Councillor Murray brought up the other point that I was going to bring up, because I travel over that mountain interchange daily. And when you're accessing coming up to that overpass, both coming south and going north, the lines are not there at all. And it seems to me legally, they should have lines there. It seems to me that that's illegal to not have lines to direct people. And so they need to be brought up. Modi needs to be brought up. So I'm totally in favor of that letter going to Modi, saying that, you know, that's a very dangerous intersections. And for people who live here, who even know what they're doing, you still get people who maybe don't live here, and you're driving where you're supposed to be, but it becomes very dangerous when the other person doesn't know where they're supposed to be. So it's a very haphazard exchange there, and there's multi-lights and multi-lanes of traffic that are all trying to cross in front of each other. So I'm in favor of that letter, and I'd support that strongly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Murray, for bringing this motion forward. We, as a community, we have made progress with respect to reducing car accidents in our lifetimes, but there's still far too many accidents, and they can have far too long-lasting and serious effects on everyone involved. Better road markings, certainly it's perhaps some of the low-lying fruit, you might say, with regard to making our roads safer. I would note as well, following up on Councillor Forbes' point about difficulty with seeing some of these lines in the rain and the dark, older people in particular, and we have more and more older people in our community can have challenges seeing at night when driving a car. That's a well-known fact. From my point of view, yes, there's costs, but the costs are small compared to the costs of the accidents and the injuries involved. And at the same time, of course, it would be best if the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure would come along and contribute and share in this important work with respect to community safety. So thank you, Councillor Murray. Very pleased to support.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Mr. Joyce.
Through Your Worship, just thanks, Council, for their comments. The cost of, first of all, I was remiss in not introducing Pam Lund, who works in our Transportation Traffic Department. So you will see her here occasionally when we're dealing with transportation issues going forward. The costs are about 3 times that of thermoplastic. But in your discussions around safety, one of the options Pam and I were talking about this morning is approaching ICBC. They've been very helpful in the past in supporting some of these programs, especially when it looks to reducing accidents. So that's something we will do. I think also staff can forward the work plan for this year. Some of the roads, Councillor, you mentioned Dollarton, are on that plan. So work will be done that this year on the lining. So I think it'd be helpful for Council to see that. And then in the meantime, staff can do a report on some of the options and the costs associated with it. And I would encourage that we do look at reallocating some resources into this arena. I think it's something that would be money well spent in this program. And that, correct. And I think the ministry, probably at a staff-to-staff level, they have set budgets as well. And it would be helpful for Council to endorse something along those lines so we can have a talk with the ministry about increasing their budgets in this arena.
Thank you very much. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to turn off my video because I think I have a bit of a bandwidth issue, so I think the connection might be better if I turn that off. Thank you very much, Councillor Murray, for bringing forward the report. I am very much interested in road safety. My voting record would suggest that in previous motions that I brought forward. And I think our staff are generally very aware of all of the different tools that we have available to make road safety a priority. So I would be happy to see us allocate more resources to road safety in general. Specific to road markings, I'm not sure if this is going to make a huge difference in terms of road safety for the potential cost, but I think it's certainly worth looking at so that we can see what those numbers look like and what the cost difference would be from some other solutions that might exist. I just wanted to highlight, that it's important that we look for, look after the safety of all road users. I'm always looking at the most vulnerable road users, so people that are walking, people that are cycling or rolling. And I think, there's other things that we could be looking at. I know lighting is an issue in a lot of areas. So I would also definitely support the letter to Modi. I know with some of the areas that are around Modi infrastructure, it's been really challenging to get those improvements made. I think of one particular crosswalk on Lynn Valley Road near the highway there, which it took years of advocating to Modi to make that happen. So I'm very supportive of that addition to the motion. But yeah, I think when we look around the world, there's better ways of doing things in a lot of areas, including road safety. And I saw the video that's been going around about the use of this road paint in Australia, where it looks really effective. So I'm certainly interested in looking at it again. Cost will have to be something that's taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Back. Sorry, Councillor Hanson, is that from before? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, just my comments on it. Well, first of all, I'm glad to hear everybody else is having a problem with it. It's not just me getting older. But I think it is telling from the report that 80% of the complaints are about spaces that are actually controlled by the provincial government. That, obviously those areas are key central areas in our community, which is cut in half by the highway, and therefore almost everybody's driving through those, all the drivers are driving through those areas in our community on a regular basis. I had a slightly technical question for Mr. Joyce. You're infinitely qualified to answer it, I hope, which is how thick is the top coat of asphalt on a pour like the Parkway?
That's a very good question. So our asphalt thickness depends on the type of street, whether it's local, collector, or arterial. It's usually put down in a base course and a top lift, and your top lift's 2 inches thick, rolled out.
So that's one of the key problems with putting the cat's eyes in the ground, is that you take your 2 inches of coverage and then you lose an inch of it, which basically means you're creating a spot where you're going to have a crack right down the road because you've already cut its strength in half by digging them down. And so the challenge is when they're doing it in the States, and maybe not at the municipal level, but I certainly know within the highway system, they're doing it in concrete, and they're doing it in very thick concrete when they do the highways. And so it doesn't actually lose 50% of the resilience of the street. And so I recognize that is definitely a challenge in our climate, to putting the cat's eyes in a recessed space, because you have to dig into the you'd still have the same problem because you're still having to dig down. Therefore, you're making the top coat too thin and it's going to go into the base layer. And so that's one of the challenges with them. I do think that we should be talking to both ICBC and the province, and specifically identify areas where ICBC is hearing actual car accidents and prioritizing. Maybe we do push it to a higher standard, even if it has a higher cost, in areas that are within our jurisdiction and represent a higher aggregate crash statistic. But it's the spots where I'm thinking about the challenges, quite often it's where you've had a laning in place and we've got a little bit of a divot in the ground from where people have been driving, and then we change the laning to accommodate a bus lane or some other thing that we're doing, totally reasonable for us to do so. But when the rain hits and the lights reflect off the rain, all I can see is the dips. I can't see the paint. And therefore that's what ends up with me ending up in the wrong spot necessarily. And the spot that I find it the most is an MOTI one, which is Main Mountain, where when you're coming westbound or eastbound through that intersection, the lines disappear. And the only thing you can see is the old divots, which will actually end you up in the wrong spot as you cross that space. I would be kind of curious. I know some of this is just me getting older, but some of this is probably also, I think the intensity of the white lights that we've been putting in on our roads, I don't know if they're helping. I think they're helping me see cars and detail, and they're definitely helping me see pedestrians better. But I gotta say, the yellow lines pop, the white lines disappear. And I think it has something to do with the lighting that we've been installing in those areas. And I've definitely seen some of the blue ones into the mix as well. And so I'd be kind of curious, maybe as we're piloting different materials to paint on the ground with, we should also be considering, changes in the color of the lighting or something to make those white lines pop for a longer period of time. Because it's inconsistent across the community and it's concern. But again, where we're going to spend extra money, I think we do need to justify it through crash statistics with ICBC, because we will not be able to afford to roll it out through the entire community. So we should focus where the risk is first.
And that's what we said.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I see no further speakers at this time.
Friendly amendment to add the. I agree.
Oh, okay. So I think that's a friendly that we're going to communicate with the provincial government, because the MOTI spaces are already challenged. Mr. Joyce, did you have additional comments?
I do not, Your Worship.
Okay, so we'll take that as a friendly then, that we're going to communicate the concern to the provincial government and MOTI. I'm sure we won't be alone. I'm sure you're experiencing that in other municipalities across the region, but I see no further speakers. I'm prepared to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council. Okay, moving on to the last item of the regular part of the agenda is again a council motion and report. This is from Councillor Pope, Public Engagement and Alternatives to Public Hearings. Councillor Pope, did you have some opening comments, and you'll be moving your report, I'm assuming? Yes, seconded by Councillor Murray. Go ahead, Councillor Pope.
Thanks very much. Well, this is simply a motion to get this onto a public workshop agenda so that council can learn about different ways to engage the public and involve them more in municipal decision-making processes. It is about so much more than what it says in the headline about renovating public hearings. This work began by SFU's Centre for Dialogue in partnership with the BC Law Institute and CMHC, before the provincial government changed the laws that required public hearings, the goal being to speed up the zoning approvals. However, we still need to know what the community thinks about issues, the wastewater treatment plant, the budget, active transportation, infrastructure spending. But as SFU points out in its brochure, that public hearings, this is a quote, public hearings are often viewed as performative exercises that exacerbate societal divisions and leave people angry or apathetic toward local government. Now, I believe that apathy is a big reason why only 22% of voters cast ballots in the last election. And so what this workshop will provide, I hope, is evidence-based ideas for gathering feedback from communities and greater involvement from the public in municipal decision-making. Burnaby and Gibsons are among 4 municipalities that have already collaborated on pilot projects along these lines with SFU. So I believe that this type of process has the ability to reach out to community members we don't normally hear from, including youth and young families and newcomers. So I think it's important that we learn more about this research and all the innovative ways that SFU has found to increase engagement. I think it will build more engagement in the district's municipal issues. It may increase voter turnout, but ultimately, I think it will make for a healthier community. And those are my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Muir, is the seconder additional comments?
Thank you, Mayor Little. Yeah, I'm always in favor of opportunities for the community to come and speak to their elected officials. I think, you know, I've been to, I guess I could say, hundreds of public hearings. An issue that I was involved in and before I was a councillor, hosted the largest public hearing on the North Shore's history, which was Cove and Mountain Forest. There's 2,000 people in the first night, and it went on for a couple of days. You know, I'm, you know, apathy for me is, I think it's because people feel like we don't listen to them. We go through the process and you could fill, you know, they certainly listened to Cove and Mountain Forest when 2,000 people were in the room. And we took an area that was slated for development and turned it into a park. But we've had full audiences in this chamber, and what they were asking for was the opposite direction that council went. And I think people feel like government listens during an election, or people or politicians listen during elections. They're always interested in, you know, listening to people's thoughts and their comments and wanting to talk to them. And then when they get elected, they stop listening. And, you know, that's why they're apathetic, because they just feel like it's a waste of time. You know, they come out, they spend time, you know, bringing their issues and forward, and then, you know, the opposite happens. It's interesting in the under the British Columbia Law Institute link that Councillor Pope put in, that, you know, lately public hearings have attracted some pointed criticism. They've pointed to studies and surveys that indicate widespread dissatisfaction with the process. Current public hearing requirements, critics say, result in cost, wasted time, low satisfaction, and sometimes trauma. Wasted time listening to residents, taxpayers. You know, I don't think listening to people is a waste of time. And I think the costs are, you know, depending on the issue, if you're talking about a 25, 30, $40 million project, you know, is 100 grand on a process too much to sit and, you know, go through a public hearing process? We're putting up signs and notices and asking people to come and sit here and put your plans that you would always already have to submit to a planning department in front of the community for comment. Like, what is wasted about that? It's going to be interesting to really see if killing public hearings and public process is going to speed up housing. To me, that's just ludicrous. You know, let's look at, I think Mayor Little's talked about this over the years. Let's look at the layers upon layers upon layers of bureaucracy governments have put in place that has raised the cost of implementing housing. So I think that the quasi-judicial nature of public hearings have saved an entire mountain in the district of North Vancouver from development and allowed it to be returned to the community for outdoor recreation, trail networks, a recreation for mountain biking and hiking and equestrian use and getting out into nature, as Bonnie Henry told us during the pandemic. Good God, if we hadn't had that during the pandemic, where would we have been? So, you know, those, I'll take my other 2 minutes. Those battles over the years were fought at that public hearing process. And quite frankly, taking away that quasi-judicial role from municipal governments, I'm disgusted by it. I cannot believe the provincial government felt that taking away powers of a level of government that has been entrenched in our communities for decades was the right way to go. I was just in an event last week with the Tsawwassen Nation celebrating 15 years of self-government with their treaty. We were returning power to First Nations That's the road that we are on. That's the road we should have been on decades ago. But we are returning power to First Nations. And yet we find municipal government's power being taken away. I find that very ironic and hypocritical. And I, again, very, very disappointed. So anything to return discussion and the ability for the public to come out and feel heard by their elected politicians, I will always champion, I will always support. I thank Councillor Pope for bringing this forward so we can hear people, really hear them, and listen to what they have to say. And, you know, I see myself as a servant of the people. I always engage with the local community about all issues. It's not what I think, it's what the community thinks. And I trust the community. I've always trusted the community and their perspectives. And I may not agree with them on every point, and I don't always agree with everybody that I talk to on different issues. But generally, they've got a good view of how we should move forward in our community, and I do trust them. And it's too bad that the provincial government doesn't.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillors Back and Hanson. Councillor Back, your comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, I would like to address maybe at a future meeting, but in the council procedure bylaw, this habit of certain members of council taking an extra 2 minutes speaking time on their first time. I know it seems to happen a lot. Anyway, that's an aside. I just want to make a note of that. Maybe we can look at it in the future.
That's been our practice for years, that you can speak 4 and 2, and if you run out of time, that you can take your all 6 minutes together. That's been our practice for years, but happy to discuss.
Yeah, I just think it's something we should discuss. I don't think it was necessarily the intention of the procedure bylaw to have it be used to kind of circumvent the speaking order. But anyways, it's something we can address at a different forum. I will be supporting the motion. It does seem like a bit of an interesting process that Councillor Pope has had to bring this by way of a councillor report. I think there was general agreement, or there is agreement generally that public engagement and looking at alternatives to public hearings should be something that we would all be open to. And having an organization like this come and speak at a workshop would be a positive thing. But regardless, I'm happy that we're able to have the discussion here tonight. I think in my experience over the last 5 years on council, public hearings have been limiting in the fact that you typically are not hearing from a wide cross section of the community. You are often hearing from people who are opposed to an issue, whether it be a development or any other issue, and largely for, you know, in many cases for good reason. But you're not always hearing a cross section. As I always like to say, I'm careful I'm not just hearing from the loudest voices in the room, which is often what you will get with public hearings. So I think particularly now that the province is going to be prohibiting public hearings in many cases, we should be looking at every opportunity to engage with the community in other ways. And so, yeah, I'll just kind of leave my comments there. I think any ideas that we can glean that will help us, you know, hear from a wider section of the community on any issue should be something that we should be open to and looking at. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson, followed by Councillor Forbes. Councillor Hanson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Pope, for bringing this. We obviously need new ideas for better engagement with our community. And the fact that we have a 22% voter turnout means that we're clearly not listening to everybody, and we're clearly not communicating with everybody. So thank you very much. I very much look forward to the workshop and look forward to working on this important public policy issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes, your comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I'm pleased that this report has come forward. I think that, I could be wrong, but I think all of us feel that we got elected to listen to the grassroots. And that's who we're supposed to represent. And I don't think you can represent the grassroots of any municipality from Victoria. So I'm very disappointed about the public hearing being swayed, because I can also think of Lynn Canyon Park not being developed. And I can also think of, although not successful, I can think of trying to get affordable housing at Emory and the impact that had on the community. So you can't have everything perfect, and we should always strive to find better ways to get involvement and better ways to get public input. But I'm disappointed that we're not going to have public hearings anymore, but I'm open to listening to all kinds of alternative ways that we may get more input, more voices, more people heard. So I'm in favor of listening to any ideas to try and keep the public involved and get them more involved. For them.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a tricky issue for me because I think a lot of times when people get frustrated with a public hearing, it's because they're hearing something different than their own preconceived notions sometimes going in. And that can go either way. People, are more pro-development and the community says they're not in favor of a particular development, or people who are not interested in development and they hear people coming out very much in favor of it. I really think that that's where the frustration is that we didn't expect what came out of the public hearing, or it differs from the general views that we approach issues from. In school, I studied government systems and political science. And at the time I was going through school, the province of BC was going through the STV review. And so we did a deep dive into what was going on with STV at the time. And the idea was very similar to what is proposed for the Gibson Citizen Assembly, where they took 25 people and they trained them up. And what we saw, though, was really after all of the effort and all of the time, you take random citizens and you put them in there, their feedback on day one was very different from their feedback at the end. And that's sort of expected as a person gets more informed about an issue. But the problem is, all they were hearing back is what they told them. And so the education process that they went through to bring citizens up to speed on these particular issues, that was what was reflected in the final result, because they've all been brought through the training process together. They'd all been told the same answers to the same questions, and therefore they parroted back exactly what had been taught to them. And so the BCSTV system wasn't successful. It ended up not being supported, and no provincial government since that time has dared do another kick at the cat of it. And so I think we've already demonstrated that this council can sit and listen to the community and hear their arguments. And the different conclusion, I fully agree with what Councillor Murray said, but the one different conclusion I come to from it is that we can still be swayed by the logic of the argument. And it's not necessarily the passion of the room. We can still calm down, look at the situation, and come to a conclusion that is hopefully based on our experience, the input that we've had, the expert advice we've had, the community's response. And in the end, we've had some controversial ones where 1,000 people opposed to something. And we still recognize the overwhelming good that project can do in the community, and we voted for it. And so I think there's already a lot of evidence that we do what this says it sets out to do. I have to tell you, I've gone through all the study guides, I've gone through all the resources and reports on the website for this. They were given $2.5 million to do this research project. And I got to tell you, I haven't seen $2.5 million worth of recommendations coming out of it, or changes that the provincial government is then going to go and adopt province-wide. I don't know that it's healthy for each individual municipality to have very different approaches to these supposedly standardized processes in the province. And so I think it is something that should come from the provincial government if we are going to review it. I have my own issues that I get frustrated by, and I'm not at as many public hearings as Councillor Murray, but I've been through a lot of public hearings myself. I'll take my 2 minutes if I may. And the challenge that I have is that I get bugged when we sit down and a member of the public comes and tells us what their interest is. I'm a neighbor. this is going to affect me. And then I have someone else come up and say that they are also affected by it and they have a different view. And then I Google search the person's name and they work for the developer. And they didn't announce that they worked for the developer. They didn't share their conflict of interest in the process. And we accepted equitably with people who did share their interest in the process. I find that absolutely frustrating. I get, you know, we have some very good developers who are doing good projects in the community. And it's very hard to get members of the public to come out and support a development, but to, you know, instead engage your staff and tell them to go and say positive things, or partner business to say positive things about your development. I have a big problem with that feedback being treated equitably with our residents. So I think that there are things that we can achieve through this. The ones that I'm a little bit bugged about, I actually don't find anywhere in these reports. And maybe it's because from this chair, I get a bit of a different view of public hearings. You can ask those questions, but ultimately, I guess I still come down to the conclusion that it should be done at the provincial level, and you shouldn't have largely different standards and rubrics across from one municipality to the next. This should be something that is generally standardized in our community. Next speaker I have is Councillor Pope, followed by Ma. Councillor Pope.
Thank you very much. I just want to pick up on what I've heard around the table a lot, which is people saying things like, we listen to the community, we will always listen to the community, or a member of the public comes to speak at a public hearing. But the fact is, we are not hearing from the community at public hearings. And I'm here to say that we probably never have. And the reason we haven't is because we don't force it to be inclusive. We don't make it inclusive. We don't make it accessible. And these are two of the key points that this organization is working towards, so that young people will show up to give their opinions, so that they will feel like their opinions are valued here. And so people with accessibility issues can find a way to be heard at these meetings without possibly, you know, having to be here in person, or maybe they need to be assisted with a bus pass to actually make it here. And I saw this happening when we were having the public hearings on Keith Road with the voices we hardly heard from, which were the people that were the most affected, the homeless and the people who are extremely vulnerable, who had tremendous hurdles to have their voices heard in this forum. So it's really more about equity and reaching people that we have been unable to reach before. And I think it's important that we pursue that. And thank you all very much for your support on this.
Thank you, Councillor Ma.
You know, I wasn't really gonna say much because, you know, I thought we'll save it for the workshop where we can have these discussions. One thing that I think, you know, this listening to everyone, as Councillor Pope says, you know, the nature and the types of points that we're bringing up during this discussion, to me, kind of reinforces the need to have that workshop, you know. And I'm gonna listen, and, you know, listening from Mayor Little before, I'm gonna have an open mind and I'm gonna be amenable to persuasion. So I'm gonna come into this workshop with an open mind. So thank you.
Anybody else like to, yes, Sarah.
Thank you. So through your worship, and thank you, Council, for your comments. Just wanted to make a note that in light of the recent provincial housing legislation, staff are reviewing our public engagement processes as well. And we'll be reporting back to Council on options once we discuss with our communications, clerks, and legal departments. And so hopefully we can also support this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
question in regards
I think
to?
you and I are both over time.
Okay.
Okay, so, all right, I see no further speakers on the matter. Ready to call the question? All those in favor, contrary minded, motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, on to reports, council. I did want to comment on a couple of things. One, I know there was unfortunate news. A very prominent member of the mountain biking community in North Vancouver lost their life while mountain biking. This is someone who's a teacher at Windsor, and while my son's aware of the teacher, he's not the direct teacher of my son, but he's one of the teachers locally at that high school. And unfortunately, he was mountain biking on Cyprus and lost his life over the weekend. And I think it's been made public. So his name was Andrew Chu. And I know that the mountain biking community is very upset about the situation, and we'll be looking at ways to try to make sure we can learn from this and make sure that we can make mountain biking safer for everybody involved. But I did just want to share that. That was a very upsetting thing this last weekend. I did have the pleasure of opening the Arnold Wollner rescue base, which is up at Cap Gate. And so North Shore Rescue has been working in partnership with Metro Vancouver and a number of private donors to produce a permanent SAR station up there. They were doing so many of their calls from that space where they only had 2 sea cans, like marine containers, that they were using, and it was absolutely insufficient support for the number of rescues that they were performing out of the Cap Gate area. And so they got together, and yes, the project grew over the course of it, but the sponsors also stepped up and contributed more, and it resulted in a great project with a really good space, so that you have multiple meeting rooms in an event. You do have to be sensitive about unfiltered information coming back to rescuers when you have family members present, and having separate rooms and places that they can conduct the rescue with a little bit of discretion is very, very helpful. That space is being relied upon a lot. And now that they have the new space there, it'll probably be relying more, particularly for night operations. And as I said at the meeting, the reason why North Shore Rescue is at the highest level of search and rescue services in the country is really because of how much they pushed on this, what they call the HETS program, which is the helicopter extraction program. And so they were not just using helicopters for bird dogging or figuring out the scene and figuring out what's going on in the area. They created the long line program so that you could fly in and use the long line. They fought through all of the hoops with the provincial government, and the provincial government was very uncertain about the risks to move to a winch program where they could actually hoist on the new Dauphin Eurocopter. They could actually hoist people back up into the helicopter. Before that time, all they could do is at night operations is they could drop a bag to someone, or they could fly in a rescuer to stay overnight with you in the space, but they couldn't actually extract. And so then the next step was to produce the night vision goggle program, where you could both see, keep everyone safe, do the extraction, and get the person out of theater without ever having to really put rescuers at risk as well, and not have to wait out the night for a ground search to come in the morning. But all of these things happen together. They all work together. The helicopter without the winch, without the night vision, without the base doesn't work, and any one of these pieces doesn't work. But when you put it all together with the skilled and professional experts in North Shore Rescue, you get better outcomes, and you bring rescuers home safe, and you bring closure to families, and you bring people in distress the medical care that they need. And so we are so blessed to be served by this group of amazing volunteers in our community. And this is one more tool in them, one more tool for them. And I mean, that really is the goal is to put the proper resources in the hands of your experts and then let them do amazing things in your community. So it was my pleasure to be there to open it with councillors Pope, Ma, and Murray. And then we also had representatives from the city and West Van and the province and the federal government. It was excellent. Look forward to seeing many successful rescues out of that space going forward. I'll let someone else. I've got a couple more reports I was going to touch on, but I was just going to check in. Councillor Murray, you've indicated you have a report.
Thank you, Mayor Little. And yes, it was a great event. And as you know, as the years go by, the call volume continues to rise for North Shore Rescue. And during the event, they had 2 calls. One where the helicopter had to leave. It was parked and for viewing by the visitors that were attending the event, but it had to take off. And then at the end of the event, another call came in. So they continue to be very, very busy with more and more people going into the backcountry. It's it's something that we really need to think about because they are all volunteers. They're a very skilled group of men and women, and we are so lucky. The original founders of that organization, Jerry and Dave Brewer, were there. They're still very involved, although not, actively with rescues, but they are still very involved. They're mentors. They continue to be mentors to the group, and we really have to remember that we're so lucky to have them and not take it for granted, because as we grow as a region, will we be able to continue grow organizations like that? It's a very, rigorous program that any volunteer that's interested in joining search and rescue goes through. You have to have the significant support from your family, and the families, they deserve as much credit as the volunteers, because they're the ones that are going to be left on those Christmas mornings and, every other day in between, when, their loved ones have to leave in the middle of a snowstorm. So we just have to really remember that we're very, very fortunate to have them. And now we're very, very fortunate to have their team leader as our fire chief. Very, very fortunate. His skills are, his community skills and leadership skills are, second to none. So we're very fortunate to have Chief Danks leading our fire department. So it was an excellent event and significant private contributions, which again is very telling of the work that North Shore Rescue does. I did briefly mention that on Wednesday, I was able to attend the treaty celebration for the Tsawwassen First Nation, celebrating 15 years of, actually, I'm thinking it's Thursday. Sorry, it was a busy week. No, it was Wednesday. And 15 years of self-government. They had at their longhouse in Tsawwassen an event that I attended with the chair and vice chair of Metro, staff, and members of the board. And the premier was there, and other dignitaries. And the Tsawwassen just spoke repeatedly. Their leadership spoke about, coming together as a community, and working together, communicating with one another, and being one to, move forward. And the ability for them to be able to grow and govern themselves and work alongside their partners it was, very telling in the place that we are at right now, and specifically, again, the place that municipal governments are at. I felt the irony in the room where we were all talking about trying to do this together, and I feel like they are being, given back control of their land, back control of themselves. They have removed themselves from the Indian Act, which, many First Nations still are under those policies and legislation. And they took a very, very big risk by doing it. I was a counselor when they were going through those negotiations, and it was a very big risk for them to leave that net that they had. But boy, they've propelled themselves forward, and for all those risks that they took, They've benefited 100 times from it. They recognize there's still significant work to do, but they are, they're making, they're their own level of government. They sit at the board of Metro Vancouver, and it's a healthy, and it's been a very successful model. Kim Baird was there. She was able to speak. She was the lead negotiator for the Tsawwassen, chief of the Tsawwassen when the treaty was signed. And Chief Cassidy allowed her to do the remarks for the nation. And it was a very proud moment, and I was really happy to attend as a member of Metro. But again, the irony for us is that, all the work that we've done over these years, all the time and energy and the council time, the community time, the staff time, building plans for our community, I feel is being really impacted by the legislation that the provincial government has put in place. I'm very hurt by the actions of the provincial government. I've spent nearly 30 years of my life working in this community. And I can't help but feel that, there's a divide, a division, and I believe it's very unfair. And I'm going to continue speaking out about it and talking to people, the colleagues and other municipalities about it, because I think that provincial government needs to hear more about working together as one.
Okay. Thank you. Are there other reports? So it's actually been a long time since we had a regular meeting of council, because we had 2 workshops, and then we had Easter, and we had a few other breaks along the way. So it has been a while. I did want to mention that I did attend the CAPU Student Union for a lunch to talk about transportation and housing issues as they go ahead. They're about to embark on a trip to the federal government to try to ask for support, and they wanted to meet with all of us first to hear our feedback and help them formulate their planned trip to visit the federal government. Obviously, transportation issues still continue to be a challenge for the university, and now we have about 700 units underway within their area, but their goal is to have 2,000 units of housing within the school campus master plan. Part of that, the challenge there is that they didn't start producing housing until they were over 50 years already in the location. And so while some other schools have had housing for a long time, CAPU is getting going. But the units that are underway now will really give them a boost in the arm. I also attended with councillors Back, Ma, and Pope to the Young Citizens Forum that we hosted here in the council chamber. It's an opportunity for people to go through sort of a municipal 101 and hear about how our level of government operates. They were also visiting, they'd also visited West Vancouver and City of North Vancouver as well. That was a good opportunity for young people to get engaged. Another piece that another event that came up a couple of weeks ago was the North Shore Sport Awards, where we play an active role in promoting that. And it just really, it weighs heavy on me a little bit that, municipalities have a very unique role that we should all be very proud of in sport. Everybody that is being there recognized for excellence in sport, whether it's, someone who's had a great deal of local and provincial success to internationally successful people. I mean, Connor Bedard was one of the people recognized. They all started at a rec center, pool, a rec center, ice sheet, a district of North Vancouver sports field, our trails, the amenities that the municipality puts in with the least number of barriers possible to make it so that people can engage in sport. And their ultimate journey was to the highest levels of sport in the world. And so it's something that we should all be very proud of, is our role in creating those barrier-free, high-quality public spaces in our community. You never know where it's going to send someone. It may just help someone like me get out and walk the dogs, or it may help someone achieve the highest level of international success. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're providing those amenities in our community. So I did want to highlight the North Shore Sport Awards. Go to the website, check out the winners, but there's a lot of amazing inspirational stories for people right here on the North Shore. Did you have a report? I see your hand up. Okay. Okay. Any other reports? Okay, Council, we finished the business of this evening's meeting. I hear Councillor Murray's offered adjournment. I'll accept. Once again, thank you to staff for preparing some of the reports, although most of the reports tonight were prepared by Council. Well done. Thank you to members of the public for participating in the meeting. Council, have yourselves a great evening and a great week. We'll talk to you later. Thank you. Looks like it's doing something. I can now see a share.